Yeah, so Carrie Vrabel, food forager, and she's certified by the state of Indiana and the state of Michigan as a wild mushroom ID expert. So that's really exciting. And she teaches online and in-person foraging classes. Her business is called Wild Edible Indiana, and we're really happy to have her here. So if you guys give her a warm welcome, and then we'll get started.
Thanks. Hi, good to see you guys. I have been teaching foraging in the area for about 5 or 6 years now. I'm also writing a book for Indiana University Press of wild edible plants native to the state of Indiana. So this is my life, I'm obsessed. So if you're interested in wild edible plants in our area, this is the book I really recommend. It's kind of like an encyclopedia of edible plants in our area. Okay, so the first thing about foraging that it may seem obvious, but in order to become, if you're interested in foraging, the first step is to become a really good plant identification person, to work on your ID skills, because you never want to put anything in your mouth that you're not 100% sure of the species. And so Sam Thayer, who the book I just passed around, he has sort of a 5-step recommendation that you have a tentative ID, so you might have a guess, like, oh, I think that might be catnip, but I'm not sure. And then you would compare your plant to a reference, like his book or a field guide, and then try it in another book. Some people, I feel like right now it's really common for people to just use their phones. They have their apps, and then some people will do like the Google reverse image search. And they're not bad. If you're interested in like a smartphone app, I use Picture This. That's the one that I like the most. But I would say at its best, it's maybe 70-75% accurate, which is fine if you're just interested in a general guess of what the plant is, but you never want to rely on that alone to eat something. So with stinging nettle, is anybody surprised that stinging nettle is edible? Because it stings. Sting your mouth. It's really easy. It's easy to get rid of the sting from stinging nettle. You can dry them, so just drying the leaves. So once they're completely dry, they don't have any sting anymore. You can steam them as soon as it hits boiling water. The sting goes away. You can even put it raw into pesto, because the physical act of processing up those leaves will break those little needles that have the stingy stuff in them. This is what they look like right now. So they were young, starting like late March into April. They were small, and they were good for that's the time when you would eat the actual leaves, because they're still tender. They taste nice. They taste like a kind of a mild asparagus. They're very nutritious. They're high in minerals. It's a really, really good edible green. But then at this stage, when the leaves get bigger like this, the leaves get really tough. Like even if you cook them and boil them, they're just like, you're chewing, and it's just not like breaking down. So in this case, the best use for them is to make a tea, or you can also use it as a soup broth. And I brought you some stinging nettle tea to try. So, because I think it's exciting to try a scary stinging nettle thing. It actually tastes really nice, I think.
I'm excited.
So if you can help me.
Oh, yeah.
So this tea, it tastes a little bit, I think it tastes a little bit like a mild asparagus or like a green tea. So if you put honey or sweetness in it, it could be a nice tea. And then if you put like sodium in it, it would make a nice soup broth. So it's kind of right in the middle.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
A little savory tea.
Yeah. Okay, so what I did to make this tea, here's a close-up of the leaves. This is about what they look like right now. So I just went out this morning and I picked, I would say so I made like a 40 ounce, which is what, like five cups of tea for you guys. And I would say I used probably about maybe 4 cups of leaves. So and they're big right now, so they're easy to just grab, and I just sort of stuffed them into a French press. And I like to break them up a little bit to kind of get more of the flavor. And then I just boiled water, and I poured the water, just as soon as it was done boiling, I poured it over and let it steep for about 20 or 30 minutes. And then I just pressed all of the plant material down, and that's what you got. So it's really, really easy. It couldn't have been easier to make. Okay, so mulberry, which is totally, right now, it's ripe, and I just harvested like a gallon and a half for the restaurant 2 days ago. Mulberries are really interesting. They have an interesting story. So on the right-hand side is the white mulberry, or otherwise known as the Asian mulberry. And 95% of the time, if you see a mulberry, it's going to be this one. It's our non-native mulberry. And then this, we actually have a native mulberry. It's called a red mulberry, native to Indiana. And the leaves, you can see the leaves of the white mulberry that I bet a lot of you have on your property. They're glossy. And then the native red mulberry, you can't really tell too well in the picture, but they're usually a lot bigger, and the leaves are rough, they're not glossy, and they're hairy on the underside of the leaf. Confusing. So it got the name because of this cultivar, the white mulberry. So some plant people like to call this Asian mulberry instead of white mulberry, because really it looks like this, and so it's weird to call this white mulberry because these are purple, So mulberries, the non-native mulberry that's just like taken over this area, was actually brought over in the 1600s because people wanted to start a silk trade in North America. So normally they were having to import silk, from overseas. And so the idea was if they would create a silk trade here, they'd make a bunch of money. And this silkworm, the primary food source for the silkworm is the Asian mulberry tree. And so these guys basically brought trees over and planted big fields of them, and then tried to have, put silkworms on them and then make silk here in the United States, and before it was the United States. And actually, this went on for hundreds of years, and I read that in the 1800s, Virginia passed a law that I think every land-owning man had to plant at least 4 mulberry trees on his property or something in order to make this happen. It ended up not being practical and not working out, but we're left now with all of these mulberry trees. So it really started because some people thought they would start a silk trade here, and it just turned out not to be practical. So that's why. Okay, so this is yellow wood sorrel, and this is a native, and this is probably growing in your yard. This is a really cool one. And I think you can see, it looks like a shamrock. So this is in the oxalis genus, and it grows, it's pretty low growing, and I've got let's see, there's another picture of it. Does this look familiar to anybody? It looks similar to a clover, but it's wood sorrel. And
does it grow in the woods or in prairies?
Both. It can grow. It could be literally in the middle of your yard in full sun, or you could find it in the woods as you're walking. Either way. And so it has these little yellow flowers that are edible. Everything, all the above ground parts. We don't eat the root of wood sorrel, but all the above ground parts are edible. And then it produces these seed pods, and these are really good and crunchy.
I love eating those.
Yeah, those are my favorite part of it. So here's a good way to see the difference between white clover. You see that the leaves are oval, and then wood sorrel, it's a heart. And then black medic is similar to white clover. But you can see that that's a really easy difference. This is a plant that people say kids teach each other on the playground because when you get the heart-shaped leaf down, there's just nothing else that has that heart-shaped leaf in threes. So it's really easy to identify. And it tastes really good. It tastes like very lemony, sour, kind of like a lemon head. So I brought a little bit for you guys to try if you want to. You don't have to. If you want to just so what I would do to make sure you get the flavor, I would take maybe 3 leaves or so. Just chew it up, and as you chew it, it'll release that super like lemony, zesty flavor. So people, you don't want to go over crazy with it because it's in the oxalis genus, so it has that oxalic acid, kind of like spinach. And so if you have a tendency for like kidney stones and stuff, you just don't want to eat like handfuls of it, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, elderberry. I love elderberry. There's an elderberry at Eagle Marsh when we did the spring walk, and it's in flower right now. And so the 2 things that are edible on an elderberry are the flowers when they bloom, not the buds, but the actual flowers, and then eventually the berries once they become berries. Nothing else on the plant is edible. So even when well, I'll talk about this in a second. This is a good picture of the leaves of an elderberry. The leaves are opposite and they're compound. So this is one leaf. These are leaflets. And that's an important distinction because it often is confused with dogwood, and we'll talk about that in a second. But here's a good picture of the elderberries. Eventually they'll appear. There's another picture of the bright red stem. Okay, so the flowers, so I eat the flowers. They smell amazing. I don't know if you guys have elderberry on your property. It's a native, it's a good one to plant if you don't have one. I love having elderberry around. But for foragers, the most common way is to make like a fritter with these. And so you basically take the flower umbel, and I just like clip the stem so that it's got like a little handle and then the flower umbel. And then I dip it in a batter. I'm vegan, I make an eggless batter of it. And then you just kind of you dip it in and then set it in a pan, sort of like a pancake, you know. And then you wait for it to cook, and then I just cut the stem off of it. Well, and then I kind of use it as I kind of like messed this up because I flipped it, but anyway. Believe me, the flower's inside of there, and then you don't eat the stem. I use it as like a handle so that it's easier to eat. You don't want to eat, you want to eat as little of the stem as possible. It won't hurt to eat, little bits of the stem, because obviously you can't separate all the flowers off of the stem. But these larger pieces of stem, you want to trim before you eat, because like I said, the only edible part of the tree, or of the bush, are the flowers themselves and the berries. So elderberries are really commonly used for like syrup, is the classic elderberry syrup. People use it medicinally for like cough. People also do elderberry jam, elderberry pie. The main thing about that is that cooking the berries and sifting out the seeds. Some people get upset stomach if you went to a bush and it's in fruit. And if you just sort of picked a bunch of these off and just ate them, and including the seed inside, and you ate them raw, a lot of people would have stomach problems with that. The eating them raw or eating the seed tends to upset the stomach. So the most common application for these is to cook them either into a pie, a jam, a syrup, and to strain out the seeds. Okay, wild bergamot. This is a wonderful native, and it's really common. I bet you guys have seen this around. This is in the mint family, and the flowers are just gorgeous. And you can actually, the whole above ground part of this plant is edible, and you can actually pluck each of these flowers out individually and eat them, and they taste kind of like oregano. People call this the pizza plant because it has this like really strong oregano flavor. And people use the individual flower petals as like garnishes on a salad, or you could even like put them fresh like on a pizza or something. It's a very strong, potent flavor. Here they are when they are the young leaves, which are totally edible. We tasted these at Eagle Marsh last month, or was it last? Yeah, last month. They taste like kind of a spicy oregano, and usually they're used dried because they're so strong fresh. You don't really go to your herb garden and like eat fresh herbs very much because your mouth would like explode. But I do eat these fresh, and I have people eat them, just like taste them fresh on the walk, because there's really cool documentation of indigenous people eating fresh Monarda leaves or wild bergamot leaves while singing and dancing. And I think it makes sense when you taste it. It gives you this like zing in your mouth, and it's like it gives you kind of a jolt of energy. And I love the idea that there's this proof of indigenous people like eating it while like celebrating and dancing and moving, you know, because it just makes sense when you taste it fresh. So I like it when people on my plant walks have that experience and can kind of connect to why maybe I'm assuming, why they might have been inspired to sing and dance while they were eating the fresh bee balm leaves. They tend to grow in these big clusters. Once you get them started, they spread. And then this is a dead seed head of Monarda fistulosa, of bee balm, or wild bergamot. And it's another kind of foraging trick to learn the plant learn it when it's a baby, learn it when it's a teenager, learn it when it's like a mature adult, and then learn the dormant state or the dead state of the plant. Because when I go walking around in early spring and I see these, I think, oh, okay, there's going to be bee balm here, or wild bergamot here. And then I come back and I know that to look down and see the little baby plants, and I have a source for the young leaves and things like that. So it's just like a trick to finding plants. So here they are starting to die. The leaves are starting to die, but you can see all of these seed heads. And here is just another close-up of the young leaves. So this is a perfect stage now before it's in flower. This is where I would harvest these leaves and dry them, typically dry them. But I would take a couple bites while I was there because I like the excitement of the flavor. Pine trees. This is a eastern white pine, this picture, native. And edible in a weird way. Do you guys remember Ewell Gibbons? And he said you can eat the whole pine tree. He was famous for saying that. So pine the needles are known for being very high in vitamin C. And that's true of all of our pines. All of our pines are considered edible. There are some, like the ponderosa pine in particular, there have been studies done that in higher quantities, it could cause trouble with pregnant women. And so they basically think, there's basically a recommendation that pregnant women don't have pine because it can encourage like contraction and potentially losing the baby, I guess, in high quantities. And it's true for cows and other animals too. But that's in high concentration. And typically the way pine is used, the needles are used to make a tea. And it can be used year-round. In fact, this was the very first thing back in early March when nothing else was up yet, that I got for the restaurant. And I harvested a bunch of pine needles for them, and then they put them in the best way is even if you're making a tea, you want to cut them into little pieces to release the flavor. And they put it in a food processor, and they make their own pasta, and so they did this creamy Alfredo sauce, and they infused the cream with pine. So it's white pine infused cream, and then they use that cream to make the sauce. And that was on their menu. I think it might still be on the menu, or at least it has been until really recently. So pine needles, very high in vitamin C, and they grow in clusters of either 2 needles, 3 needles, or 5. And the easy way to know if you've got a white pine in our area is that our eastern white pine is the only pine locally that grows in a cluster of 5. And you can remember WHITE, white. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, white pine. And that's a really easy one to get started with. And it's considered a safe one. And so if you're interested in playing around with the flavor of white pine, here's an example of making white pine tea. This is what I mean. You cut it into little pieces before you steep it to release the flavor. Because It can be, if you just threw these needles into water without cutting them up or crushing them somehow, the tea would be very, very weak. And you also need a lot of needles for a strong cup of tea to get that flavor out. And that's why they food process them at their restaurant to really break up get the oil going and the juices and stuff. So, but that being said, it's a good source of vitamin C in the middle of the winter. I used to do winter foraging classes, and this is something we make. Things like rose hips and white pine are sources of vitamin C when it's snow on the ground, dead of winter. I'm going to go through these a little faster. These are going to be three mints that probably grow in your yard. And I just want to run through them really fast because they're kind of past their harvestability stage, but I wanted to mention them because if you're interested in foraging and you're going to go out in your backyard and look for wood sorrel in particular, maybe dandelions, these would be things that you'll probably find, and I just want to draw your attention to them. Like I said, they're all in the mint family. So there's purple dead nettle, which is, this is when it's young, which we're way past, this would have been maybe late March, early April, what it looked like. It has a square stem, which is indicative of a mint, and it has opposite leaves. You can't really see because of the
And alternating.
opposite leaves. Not alternating, opposite leaves. Mints have square stem and opposite leaves. And so dead nettle is used, you can eat it when it's young, so when it's like this, you could just, snip a bunch of these, and you could eat it raw. It's furry, so it's not fun to eat raw, but I've eaten it raw in salad. It tastes it tastes earthy. It's not as pungent as catnip, but it's got that same kind of vibe. So what most people do with these, it would be to put them in a saute, like what they did with the stinging nettle, put it in an omelet to give it a nice herbal flavor, to give it a kind of a, it's more of a considered a flavoring to throw into a saute. But it's safe to eat raw or cooked, either way. And it's also another thing that people use dead nettle for is, and they do this also with wild bergamot that I talked about. Some of these mints, you can actually take some leaves and chew them up and spit them out and use it as a spit poultice. If you have a burn or a cut, it's considered to be very soothing and anti-inflammatory for the skin. So it's got a first aid property too. So that's purple dead nettle. This is henbit, which looks a lot like purple dead nettle. It's also a mint. Also has a square stem. The leaves are a little bit different, and I'll show you this is a good comparison. This is purple dead nettle. You see it's square stem, opposite leaves. And then this is henbit, square stem. I know these look like they're whorled leaves, but they're actually opposite leaves. But you can see how differently they look from the side, but the flowers are almost identical. They're both completely edible in the same way. I actually prefer henbit, the flavor of henbit. And then the last one of the three that get confused, that I guarantee these are all in your yard, is Creeping Charlie. You guys probably recognize Creeping Charlie. People call it ground ivy. Again, really similar flowers to the dead nettle and the henbit because these are all mints, so they're in the same family. They have a lot of things in common. Creeping Charlie was actually brought over intentionally as a ground cover, which it just totally takes over as a ground cover. But also, before people used hops to clarify beer, this is what they used to clarify beer. So if you're interested in old herbal beer recipes, before hops was commonly used, it was Creeping Charlie. So it's a cool thing. And I think they're still using a cough syrup. They make a cough syrup with it in the UK. I think you can still buy that from pharmacies. I've heard that. I can't prove it. But so this is also edible, just like the other two. It can be eaten raw. It tastes and smells like a fresh cut lawn. That smell when you're in a neighborhood and everybody's cutting their lawn at the same time. It's a lot of this smell. It's got kind of, again, a little bit of the catnip mint family flavor to it, but then it just tastes like fresh lawn. So it's not something I love to eat raw, but it's not bad. None of the three of these are terrible by any stretch. Let's see.
Those are not great selling points.
Well, it's like, I don't want to overhype it either, because if you go out in your yard and you taste these and you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What am I doing with my life? Like, wild food tastes amazing. It does. There are so many great things. But it's also, they're very new flavors to us. They're not, it's not like hamburger and french fries. They're pungent. Sometimes they're bitters, and you just have to have kind of an open mind. So I'm trying to prepare people's expectations for, okay, so here's the test. Do you guys know which is which of the three?
Henbits in the middle.
Henbits in the middle, good.
Purple dead nettle.
Yeah.
Dead nettle, yep. And then Creeping Charlie on that side, yeah. These get confused so much. Okay, big scary one. This is not an edible one. This is poison hemlock. This is one of the most poisonous plants that grows in North America. It is non-native. It was brought over, believe it or not, I found even advertisements in some old newspaper or something for this. They call it the winter fern, and it was brought over as like a landscape plant, and from Europe. It's not native to North America, and boy does it like it here. This is where it's growing in its basal rosette stage when it's young, and it's confused with Queen Anne's lace. That's where you're gonna, if you're a forager, the only reason you would think about putting poison hemlock in your mouth is if you were foraging wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace, which I'll talk about in a minute. They look very similar, and that's the danger. The root of poison hemlock is what Socrates was killed with. He was executed with a tea made from the root of poison hemlock. So it has a long history of being a killing plant. And I'll talk about the differences. So this is Queen Anne's lace. And the way I know it's Queen Anne's lace is because it is furry. And so we have a little forager's joke that the queen has hairy legs. And so if you know that it's furry and it looks like the leaf looks like a carrot family leaf, then you know it's not poison hemlock and it is safe to eat. That is the main way to tell it. These are wild carrots. This is the same species as our cultivated carrot, actually, but it grows. It's just gone. It's a non-native that is taken off in our world. So the root is tougher than our cultivated carrot, and it's stringier, but it still tastes really good. In fact, I think it has a lot more flavor than our cultivated carrot. Anyway, back to the scary. This is poison hemlock, which again is very different. So you can see this purple spotted stem. This is when it's getting really tall, because poison hemlock can be like 7, 8, whatever feet tall. And Queen Anne's lace never has the purple splotches, and also there's no hair. These are hollow stems and they're hairless. I have an Instagram. If you're on Instagram, it's called She Forages, and that's how, if you want to see what I'm doing for the restaurant, that's where I post that stuff. But if you want to get a hold of me, this. All right. Well, thank you.